Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to news, well, CCP just dropped sort of an article on their plans for 2023 for the game. Pretty interesting stuff. There was also a short live stream from CCP, basically also explaining the content of that article a little bit. But we are looking at potentially 2 expansions in the next year, one for Q2 and one for Q4. So pretty interesting. My speculation is that the first expansion will be centered around the 20 years of EVE Online. And then the second one will be announced at FanFest, and then we will of course see and get more information as to what the content will be and the goals will be for that expansion. But definitely I'm getting the feeling that CCP realizes now with the latest expansion that a little bit of a hype cycle is something that you do want to generate, and that expansions in EVE Online are basically the way to do it. What I also found very interesting is that CCP actually dropped a couple numbers on us that kind of confirm what's been happening and what we've spotted in EVE Talk as well. Most important one to me, 34% increased production of capital ships. That's of course a lot, and that explains the better prices for minerals, but especially the very high prices for PI that we've been seeing in the last couple of months, with even higher prices since the expansion. So that's pretty cool. Lots of PvP action confirmed there as well, with I think it was like a 75% increase in PvP destruction in low sec, and even an increase in high sec as well. A little bit smaller, but also of course considering what they've done to change the ganking potential for alpha players, right? So you can't change your settings anymore, you can't gank as an alpha anymore. So it's definitely looking like there was indeed, or there is more activity in the game, and their plans are still in place for Q1, where they are hoping to bring us the allegiance system that now got a different name, and they're basically referring to HiSec as the home front of faction warfare, which I find very interesting, because that's sort of what I'm looking at. I'm not someone, I play solo, so it's not like I join huge fleets to go brawl, and so solo PvP in EVE Online, very, very difficult proposition. I'm more of a PvE guy, a laid back guy, a market guy, and so I'm kind of hoping that there will be avenues for me to take part in faction warfare to help the Galente out, but doing so in a different way than just getting in a ship and getting blown up again and again, and hopefully sometimes blowing someone up as well. I mean, I might try to do that here and there, but I'm hoping that some of these other mechanics will be interesting. So lots of stuff, in my opinion, to look forward to, and so yeah, I'm definitely gonna of course keep you guys up to date, and we'll see what we enjoy from the stuff that CCP developed. As always, we'll take a quick look at the new Eden store as well, so let's especially take a look at the services. Not spotting the sale tag on any of those. You may already have seen it on the ticker as well, with plex prices basically recovering already, and we've got some Amar skins front and center. Never really seen that one. A Baden Valkyrie skin that actually looks pretty unique and pretty cool. Yeah, kind of like that one. But yeah, lots of Baden skins. Here's we've got some Apocalypse skins, so there's definitely quite a bit of choice, but nothing special happening, no sales or anything like that. So then let's move on to the market. As always, we start with pilot services coming in at 4 minutes. There we go. Let's get started. Here is plex with the price history. First, you can see a little bit of upwards pressure here, definitely moving at the tail end, and although we don't really see the sale decline all that well here, so it's a little bit shallow, it's definitely small. It was not a sale in the New Eden store, but you basically had a good deal that you could get, I think, from Steam and from the website, which pushed us to this, well, low level for the last 2 months, pretty much average for the last 6 months, and so we can expect this to become a bit of the normal range for plex. At the moment, they are selling for 4.85 million, buyers coming in at 4.6 million, narrow margin, strong demand, nothing special happening, so that closed up a little bit, and the upwards pressure is back with slightly lower volumes as a result as well. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate that, well, it's actually moving down a little bit in the last couple of days under pressure. But of course, if we look at where the plex chart is at the lower end of the last couple of months, multiple pilot training certificates at the higher end of the last couple of months. So I think here we're just trying to find each other in a situation where we don't expect too many sales or anything like that to happen from CCP in the short term, although we still have things like Valentine's Day. I think that's always an event that does have some sales. But yeah, 2 billion practically for the multiple pilot training certificates and 1.7 billion for a first buyer coming in. Volume wise, of course, a tiny market at this point. These skill extractors next, also same thing, right? You get a decline that's basically slow and steady. I would say pressure from that plex sales rippling through the rest of the pilot service economy. And then at the tail end here, we're clearly stalling and we're actually going up a little bit in volumes, putting some pressure on the daily average price here. You can see that. I think we are back on a slight upward trend. It really all does start to depend again on what CCP's announcements will be, and well, they're giving us that first roadmap, so I'm pretty positive that CCP will be able to keep some hype going, keep some interest into the game, which does of course as well mean some interest in plex and thus pretty high demand. Next up, we've got the injectors here, or the large scale injectors, basically 1 year high point, 1 year high range, so a bit of pressure at the tail end, but overall very expensive. 946 million for the sellers, 888 for the buyers. Slight margin that opens up here, that's kind of normal at these very high ranges. And then the small scale injector, same story pretty much, although not at the 1 year high point. That was 200 million right here early November. But if we disregard this one bump, then we are again at that highest plateau ever, just above 190 million for the average prices. And here you can see that difference, right? With the large scale injectors, you do have that spread and that pressure on the downside, so buyers are being a little bit hesitant to go up above 900 million, but for the small scale injectors you don't have that spread at all, so it really does its own thing. You get more violent volume spikes, it does its own thing with the price as well. It is its own market. 190 million for the sellers and 168 for the buyers. That's a 22 million. That's above 10%. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's actually the largest margin I think that we've seen here so far, despite the most narrow margin visible on the chart. So I would say that's pretty interesting. This really is one that moves in its own way, and has, although it can't really break the general trends, of course, right? Plex going up due to the change to real life money prices, while small scale injectors has to follow as well. But on a day-to-day and on a weekly basis, small scale injector market really does its own thing. And then we've got the daily alpha injector market, surprisingly stable. Actually, you can see here the minimum price is going down towards 40 million as well. 47 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. Again, pretty narrow margin, but I am surprised at how well this is holding up at the current range, despite the fact that, well, during this period here before the bump in August, September, all other pilot services basically went up in price because of change that CCP did to real life money. And so I thought we would see more upward pressure on the daily alpha injector than what we're seeing. Possibilities. The volumes here are of course exceptional in the last sale that finally broke that plateau, that high point here for the daily alpha injectors. Perhaps there is just enough out there to satiate the market at the current price for the foreseeable future. I personally would think that speculation would put some more pressure on it than what we're seeing here. So another possibility is that CCP at the moment might be a little bit more successful in getting people to play as Omega players, to actually pay the subscription for EVE Online. And that would be very interesting because of course during the expansion launch they went with 7 days free Omega for everyone on a login basis. And that may have been enough to convince a lot of players. And if that is the case, then I think that will have been shown to be a very successful experiment. We're talking 2 months in now, so definitely some people must have taken the opportunity to become Omega players then. And we'll see if they then repeat that type of an experiment, because of course, if it is successful and if the daily alpha injectors are showing that it is, if that's the right correlation that we're drawing here, then that's very, very interesting a very interesting play by CCP that might have been very successful. We'll of course have to wait and see how everything plays out. We finally have the hypercores that are hovering just above the 500,000 ISK mark, so sort of that same pressure that Plex has gone through, showing up a little bit delayed in the hypercores. Pretty high volumes though, so here at the early start of the year, perhaps a lot of activity through the hypernet relay. It is possible. 500,000 for the sellers, 475 for the buyers. Perhaps with the holidays and with the new year, slightly more activity in the game. My general feeling is that we've got decently high activity, especially compared to the summer that we just went through, and that there is a bit of an arms race going on with that extra capital ship production in Nullsec as well. So sides are preparing for war, and hopefully it can show up somehow. And in the meantime, I think the changes that they are doing to low-sec, to faction warfare, are bringing in players that enjoy that play style, and if they can then expand that to potentially the entire player base, that would be, I think, very cool, and something that CCP can build on, which was also mentioned to be the plan for the expansion. They want to focus a little bit on those conflict drivers at the moment, bringing them not just in faction warfare, but to many more places in space. And it's looking pretty interesting. We will of course keep you guys up to date on all of that. For the pilot services, got a little bit of respite because of that sale that pushed us down here, but I would say this is bound to be over and we'll be back in the general trend. My expectation is a slight uptrend. Next up, we've got the minerals coming in at 1140. There we go, and you can see that titanium has lost back a little bit of ground, right? We went well above the 4.5 for the sales during the last EVE talk. Averages though remain below 4.5, so we just basically ran out of supply a little bit. That gap has been closed very nicely, but we're able to maintain that premium since the expansion. So we are talking 450 pretty much for the sellers, 420 for the buyers. So again, narrow margin, quite nice volumes coming in, but 500 million being bought here, 500 million here, 750 million here. There's definitely that increased demand, which again, it is slightly speculation, but now sort of confirmed by CCP as well, that we are talking increased capital production happening in EVE Online at the moment. Pyrite not able to take advantage of that, just landing on that 10 ISK. It's still not bad, but you can see how we got a bump here that went up to 12, 13 ISK, and we are slowly losing ground. If we go below 10, which I think on a chart like this is definitely possible, we could be looking at an entirely new range soon. 1034 for the sellers, 10 for one buyer, but then 938, you can see that the buyers are definitely more careful and willing to trying to bring those sell prices closer and closer, and hopefully for them below 10 ISK, so that they can get that cheap pyrite. Then we've got our Mexalon chart that also is showing a decline and is basically back to the pre-September numbers, but this one is still, in my opinion, relative. If we're still at 65 for the sellers, we're at 65.30 for the sellers, 64 for the buyers, even more narrow margin. I think this one, on a little bit of action in Nullsec, a little bit of pressure from we maybe need to put it up into even a higher gear, could recover more quickly than pyrite here. That's my feeling. And yeah, 65 for Mexalon is not great. It's not 70 plus, which we've had for a couple of months over the last year, but it is still a reasonable price. So again, for high-sec miners, titanium and Mexalon, your first two focuses in my opinion. Then we move on to low-sec. Here is the Isogen chart, back above 500 ISK as well. 530 for the sellers, 520 for the buyers. Buyers have no choice in this, right? If you gotta bring this stuff in from low-sec, those sellers are taking the risks, are responsible for the import, so they dictate the price. And you can also, I think, see here, although this is a CCP intervention, right? They mentioned that they're opening up more ores in order to try and close some of those capital production bottlenecks, or solve some of those bottlenecks. That drove the price back down, and we're back up. So there's either speculation that went wrong, where they expected more Isogen supply to materialize that just did not happen, or not enough. The other possibility, which is a little bit my expectation, is that players with the large the large reserves are either getting exhausted or are getting smarter, and that would be this stuff: 10 million here, 10 million, 15 is higher, 10 million, 5 is higher, 10 million, 5 is higher. So you can see here someone has a method to spread things out, and on an upwards push they have better average sell prices because of doing that, and we gotta go to 650 again for a 400 million price tag. As a result, this gives Isogen the potential to start to move like a more healthy market, up and down depending on supply and demand, depending on what's happening into the game. And I basically think here since December that we will be starting to get into that phase. I would not be surprised that this 530 ISK mark is enough to both push a couple of sellers into higher gear, but also to create more supplies to bring more Isogen into the market, bringing us back below a 500 ISK where active suppliers will hold off. That means I will again be in that mode where we slowly start to work our way through some of those old reserves, pushing price back above 500, and then you get a cycle that has a more movement in the price in different directions than just basically straight up, which we've been in for over a year up until December. Then the other one is Noxium, that is already in that phase, although it's wavy pattern. You can see that here though, right? May, June, you get some slight upticks, but the general trend of course was down to a low point in September, and we basically recovered back almost half of that to 1000 ISK. We are at just above 1000 for the sellers, 975 for the buyers, and here, right, we don't have like 500 million units in weight that is trying to be sold. Our volumes are a couple million, a couple 100,000, one exception here at 18 million units, but other than that, nothing too special. And so here it is really a question of, will demand overtake supply? Will we see more upwards pressure, or will we see enough supplies at this 1000 ISK for Noxium that we will continue to see pressure? But here at least it's realistic, and we can clearly see that that is what's happening in the Noxium market. We don't have billions and billions of units lying in wait for those better prices or keeping things in check for longer periods of time. So definitely an interesting chart on this one as well. One step, two steps, and then below 1000 for a couple of months, back above that, but very quickly landing back on 1000 ISK. It's really difficult to say exactly where Noxium is going. It is dependent now on supply, demand, all these market factors. For LowSec, we get a slightly different story. We basically had a super strong fall going up above 2500 here for Zydrine, for instance. I think we touched 3000 as well, and now we are starting to go back down, which to me is interesting. Because this might just be a little bit of a delayed response to those extra ores that CCP put out in the game. So AO type stars now should have extra Zydrine, Megasite and Isogen, and also some Pyrite resources. And as a result, you can see that we are starting to see a bit more substantial pressure on Zydrine. 2,573 for the sellers, 2,375 for the buyers. So margin-wise, 200 plus ISK. Yeah, that's around 10%. This actually, to me, feels like a healthy margin between sellers and buyers, and a market that is, well, trying to find its footing, but is getting away from those, well, in my opinion, ridiculously high prices of 3,000 ISK for a single piece of Zydrine. And then we've got Megasite that is actually holding on much better, although at the tail end you can see a little bit of pressure on this one as well. 2,725 for the sellers, 2,560 for the buyers. So let me see, Zydrine coming in at 257, Megasite coming in at 2,725. This is also a complete restoration of an old truth, which was that Megasite was more expensive than Zydrine. We've been in flux around that for a while, but this feels like it might just be a little bit more structural. And normally per cubic meter of ore that you mine, the lowest volume should be Megasite. It's actually Morphite, but for Tech 1 it should be Megasite, and so that logically should mean that Megasite should be more expensive than Zydrine. So we're really basically restoring back the old hierarchies in minerals, with Megasite being the most expensive Tech 1 mineral, mostly sourced from nullsec. So I wonder if that extra supply in nullsec has basically meant that they have now even more of a sway on the price. compared to what's coming from Triglavian space and things like that. Overall, pretty interesting. Megasite not caving just yet, bit of pressure at the tail end here, and yeah, very strong prices across the board because of, again, that capital ship production. Finally, we've got Morphite that was below 40,000 ISK and is now back above 40k at 41k for the sellers, 39.4 for the buyers. So a bit of a wavy pattern that's starting to take shape around that 40k mark. Same story as what I think is starting to form in Isogen and is definitely visible in Noxium. It's a supply-demand issue here. When there is when we see prices well above 40k, there's enough reason to bring in a lot of Morphite to try and get those supplies up, and so that then brings the price back down. While we're under 40k, suppliers hold off a little bit, and that slowly we go through whatever was oversupplied, and now we touch 40k again. So we're definitely in that wavy pattern. And I think these high volumes here was basically a little bit oversupplied, and this pattern, if it is confirmed, like again, right, if we go a little bit above 40 on not enough supplies, but then we crash back down below it, starts to become another place where we could look into Morphite investment. Buy below 40, sell at 45, buy below 40, sell at 45, buy below 40, and who knows, in a couple of months maybe we can again sell above 45,000 ISK. It is a possibility. The pattern is definitely starting to show here, so we'll keep an eye on that as well. Next up, the PI market, 21.25. There we go, and let's get started as always with the broadcast nodes that are able to stay above 2 million ISK. Well, now we've got the explanation, we don't have to doubt anymore. 2.1 for the sellers, 2.05 for the buyers. Super narrow margin at close to 1 year high point. Definitely pretty much the highest range for the year. Again, this is showing that very strong demand due to the production of capital ships, and I think that we will have to keep this in mind. My theory was that all of this, the increased mineral prices and the increased PI prices, are due to increased capital ship production, and CCP already intervened into the minerals, pushing Zydrine down a little bit, pushing Isogen down, which has already recovered, but they're showing their willingness to solve bottlenecks, and I think by solving mineral bottlenecks, they've now created PI bottlenecks, and they may be looking into that as well as part of some balance changes potentially, because this is of course now very expensive passive income for a lot of players in EVE Online. Next up, we've got our construction blocks that are healthily above 10k, almost 11k for the sellers, 928, so 9,300 ISK for the buyers. That's a bit of margin that opens up, so definitely a bit of hesitation. I hope that I'm not too responsible for players starting to speculate on lower prices in expectation of a CCP intervention. I have absolutely no information. This is pure speculation from my point of view, but this is definitely a nice margin that opens up here. Coolants, right, you can see that on this minimum prices probably as well. We're well above 10,000, 11.3 for the sellers, but buyers are staying below 10,000. Is definitely being a little bit more careful here. Enriched uranium starting to show signs of a little bit of weakness as well, but that's relative. 11,250 for the sellers. That is still a great price. Anything above 10k, historically speaking, is still a really good price. And on this one, buyers have no choice. It is harder to make than coolants and construction blocks, so we are talking 10,500 for the buyers as well. Then our bottlenecks will show up first in what's actually needed in the ships. Advanced PI materials, you can see here 1 year high point over the last week, above 3 million ISK for integrity response drones. Back down a little bit to 8,550, but 2.7 million for the buyers as well. A very, very narrow margin for close to a 1 year high point. This is super expensive. And again, since the expansion, capital ship production has increased a lot because, well, those prices were starting to test 2.5 million, and we're basically now testing 3 million again. This on, well, you can see that here, a very high plateau. What happened here in May, if I'm not mistaken, that's the Siege Green update that allowed basically for more and easier production of dreadnoughts especially, but capital ships across the board. And so you can see that that still has not been digested, and that's the main reason why we're seeing these crazy high prices with mechanical parts now also at the 1 year high point range, 11,000 plus ISK, above 10,000 for the buyers as well. Very, very nice. Integrity, miniature electronics, excuse me. Yeah. Refined PI materials, 10,000 ISK for the first half of the year, and now selling for 17,000 ISK, 15,000 for the buyers. In my opinion, this is like for the sellers, 70% above what you normally get for a refined PI material. Nano Factories also doing a late bump here, above 1 million. Again, I think bottlenecks in PI are being created here. First seller coming in just below that, but that's also kind of normal when you get a bump from probably 20-30%. Yeah, actually, that's, let's see if I can get one of these prices here. 840, and then we go up to 1.1 million, so that's a 300,000. Yeah, that's like 30%. Jump. That does bring in some potential supplies, but we're still very expensive. Organic mortar applicators confirming the trend as well, pushing above 1 million. From 700,000, that's going to be close to a 50% increase over the month of December. Then we've got our recursive computing modules, another advanced one, 1 year high point, 1.6 million for the sellers, almost 1.5 for the buyers as well. They have no choice. Robotics though, I was hoping that this one would make it to 100k, which was the my historical perspective always. 10,000 ISK for refined, such as coolants, mechanical parts, stuff that I made that would get into fuels. And then of course you end up with robotics, which is also tied to fuels. That was 100,000 ISK. We didn't make it, but we are still at 93,000 for the sellers, 88 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, and of course amazing price on this 1 year chart. Rocket fuels, also a December to January bump to 1 year high points. We're recovering a little bit from that, but still 14,000 for the sellers. 13, less than 1,000 ISK margin on these crazy prices. Self-harmonizing power cores, 2.25 million. Basically the highest range. So all this time since the Siege Green update and with the expansion, and basically enough or new supply to bring us back down to a more average price for the year has not materialized for the production of capital ships. And while they may of course at first have been bumping into minerals such as siderite and mega siderite, you can see that on the prices they have gone up to really high prices as well. This is probably next in my opinion. And then the question is, how will CCP respond? Smart fab units holding above 70, actually 85,000 for the sellers, 50,000 for the buyers. So here and there, especially I would say PI materials that historically have very bad or inconsistent volumes, that's where you can get some more margin between sellers and buyers, but the sell price is definitely very high. Sterile conduits, another advanced one, are just coming off 1 year high point at 2 million ISK. We're at 1.4 now, but spent most of the year just above or just below 1 million ISK, so definitely looking pretty good as well. Supercomputers slowly making their way to 200k, just below that for the sellers, but 94,000 for the buyers. Pretty strong demand. Synthetic oil just doing a spike right now, almost 15,000 for the sellers. Very, very nice, of course. Synthetic synapses then 120 to 114 for the buyers. That's a very narrow margin again for a plateau price. Transcranial microcontrollers working its way back above 100k as well, 106 to 95. And then I think the ones that really shows that trend, that change here, is water-cooled CPU. Not the best volumes, but of course also a 50% down price for most of the year, below 5,000 ISK for refined PI material. And then just since the expansion, basically catching up on almost everything. 9,000 ISK almost for the sellers, 8,000 ISK for the buyers. It's still the cheapest one in this entire list, sure, but it is also still one that went up above 50% basically since the expansion. So yeah, PI very expensive. Finally, we got our wetware mainframes that are also just recovering from a 1-year high point. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.2 million for the buyers, and yeah, up until the expansion, easily bought below 2 million discs. So the demand is there, and we got that explanation as well from CCP. So honestly, I'm selling PI. I've been selling PI for a couple of weeks at this point, and I would say that I think that's the right move because, well, solving bottlenecks, this is bound to, in my opinion, be the next one. Then we've got, which I could be wrong on it, you know, just I'm just giving you guys my opinion. I just don't want to be responsible for people losing a lot of ISK or anything like that. All right, moving on to advanced movements, coming in at 29.55. Let's see what is happening here. So the story here, also a story of CCP intervention. We start as always with the carbides, but you can see the full recovery for crystalline carbonate. And the story here is that CCP decided a little bit after the expansion actually to come in with a 25% nerf on the yield of moon mining, which of course lowers supply and increases the value of that moon mining. And so you can see the effect on the carbides has been almost instantaneous. Full recovery, 50% increase in the value, for instance, of the crystalline carbonate. Now across the rest of advanced movements, it's been slower, and my expectation is that because we're talking more intermediate products that require some extra steps, that they will have more reserves. And so I'm waiting, because my investments were in metamaterials, for instance, I'm waiting for those to do a catch-up move. So for now, we basically have a couple weeks to almost a month where crystalline carbonate has fully recovered and is able to stay above 150, 157 to 151. Next, we've got our Caldari version, which is the titanium carbide market. Went to a 1-year high point above 175. A little bit of over response probably because of that extreme potential, and we are now talking 140 to 132 for titanium carbide. I'm kind of expecting that to now stall. The production supply is selling a little bit, and that 150 will become the average price. Ferrite carbide is also giving back a little bit more ground than I thought, 143 to 127. And then for Amar, it's tungsten carbide that is back above 150 at 160 to 150 for the buyer. So here you can see that immediate response mid-December, and my PC is sometimes struggling a little bit. It is getting older, but we'll keep going. Hope it doesn't come through too much. But yeah, above 150, 140 to 150 for the sellers. Definitely a nice recovery. Then we got our metamaterials for Galente. For instance, it's photonic metamaterials. And well, it's finally happening. Although we got that initial spike as well. That was much stronger, I think, than in the others. We went back down to 10K quickly. But look at where we're trading now. 11,600 for the sellers, 10,800 for the buyers. And I bought down here well below 7.5, so you can I can take a nice profit at this point for the photonic metamaterials. I'm not sure if this is the one that I bought though. Let's see if I can see that in the, yeah, actually it is photonic metamaterials, bought for 7,000 disc, for 100 million worth. So I'm probably looking at 60 million in profit pretty damn easily. For Caldari, it's non-linear metamaterials. You can see here we started here well above what we're at now, but also the second leg, which is kind of what I was expecting, right? A bit of a catch-up that needs to be done in those materials that are more expensive, more complex. 13,400 for the sellers, 13,000 for the buyers. Could have bought these below 10,000, so a little bit less margin on this one, but there's definitely opportunity that's starting to show up. And then for Minmatar, it's plasmonic metamaterials. Also not a full recovery, but heading for 15,000. 14 for the sellers, 13.5. Could have bought below 10. And then for Amar, it's tungsten carbide. Could have bought, no, that's not carbide. I need the Amar metamaterials. Terra Arts metamaterials. Could have bought below 10,000 again. And we are talking 13,400 for the sellers, 12,800 for the buyers. I would say with a bit more patience, I would not be surprised if a 15K is still possible throughout the metamaterials. but I was basically lucky gambling on the one that went lowest, which is the Galente one, and I could sell now at a very nice profit. And I think these prices are here to stay, these types of ranges, because of course this is all down the production chain of that lower yield of moon materials in general. So we still have the others to go through as well. Let's see what they are showing. So we've got, for instance, fermionic condensate that responded immediately as well with an above 50% increase in price to 60,000 disc, a little bit too much too quickly. And again, this is one that's like at 42,000 in price, so obviously not something that you just straight up scoop out of moon mining. It has some intermediate steps, so I think it'll take a little bit more time for that lower supply to fully materialize in a substantial way here. So we went back down to 40k, which is definitely pretty low here. 41,700 for the sellers, but also 41,000 to the buyers. So the buyers do know that we're not going to substantially stay below that too much, but I would say this is likely to be a slight buy opportunity, as a price above 50k I think will become the new normal for fermionic condensates. Then we got ferrogel, went above 25,000, loses some ground, but clearly recovered a nice bit from the period before, 23 to 22,000 for the buyers. That's quite nice. And here we got Fullerites, which is back to 700 disc, full recovery. And so that's again, in my opinion, confirming that story that the lower in price you go, the more basic you go, the easier the full recovery is, because this is tied directly or much more closely to that new supply problem. So we'll need a bit of patience for those that invested in the advanced moon materials that are more expensive per unit. So 650 again, 610, and you could have bought this well below 500 disc throughout most of the year. So pretty decent profit as well, very close to 50% on that one. Hypersynaptic fibers, a little bit more expensive, so more hesitant, 6,400, and with a low point at 4,000, definitely below 5,000, so not as good. Again, you can see that pattern kind of being confirmed. Nano transistors made its way to 4,000 disc, but it is obviously more complex than the carbides and things in just hundreds of disc, and so here we do have that potential reaction from the market. But 4K for nano transistors, I got some lying around. Here it comes. So that is that crutch that we also saw in the metamaterials. But the full expectation, and I'm not even sure where we were anymore. I think here, yeah, the full expectation that I have is that we will bump back above 3.5 and get into that 4,000 disc range eventually. So now we're down to less than 3,000 for the buyers at the moment, sellers at the moment though. Phenolic composites, again 1500, so closer to the source. Immediate and very strong response to 1 year high point. 1 year high point, 2000 disc, highest price in over a year, well over a year at this point. Obviously that has a little bit of a response as well, so we are back down, but again, you could have bought these well below 1000 disc, probably 800-900 disc here, and so we are not going to test those lows again. Still 1400 already for the sellers. Then we get pressurized oxidizers, a little bit more slow and steady. The difference here, you could say, well, this is basically a full recovery, and this is actually a far more expensive item at 14,000 disc. What's happening here? Well, that's because these are new items that is be introduced when they change things, I think a year ago, a little bit over a year ago. So that is why I think they don't have as much potential to bounce back here, because there just hasn't been like almost 2 decades of production of these items to create those vast reserves out there from players, corporations, speculators, etc. Here, yeah, we're much tighter because it's much newer. And I think it's the same for, no, not the reinforced carbon fiber, but the no, not that one either. I think there were 2 of them, but did I lose one? I may have lost one. I'll need to look into that. Am I missing an advanced? I thought we had another one with this icon. Anyways, reinforced carbon fiber, full recovery as well to 1 year high point at 15,000 disc. But here we have that response that we are coming back down 12.5. Still a great price, of course. If you bought at 7.5, you're still looking at a nice profit, but a little bit older and a bit more price responsive. And then we've got ceramic fibers, a little bit, yeah, actually one where speculators came in early, right before the November expansion and then the December change. This one was basically already recovered. 330 for the sellers, 306 for the buyers. Not sure why. Maybe someone gambled right on this one and pushed the price up here for a reason, or it was just too low at 200 disc. Then we could really go to a 300, 350 at some points, but it's interesting. This one really doing its own thing, and basically was already at 300 disc before everything happened in the rest of Advanced Moon Materials. All right, let's see what the impact has been on Take-Two ships. 39.20. There we go, and here, yeah, it's even further down the production line from those supply changes on Moon Materials, so expect this to take a little bit more time as well, unless speculators all of a sudden go crazy. But for now, I don't think we see any real announcements indicating that CCP is going to change Take-Two or drastically do something about Take-Two production, which is to me a little bit surprising, because I do personally feel that you're getting a huge amount of power, extra resistance and everything that goes with Take-Two for really cheap prices at the moment. But for now, CCP seems to be happy where we're at, 126 to 114. So you can see the Basilisk. Well, you get a little bit of a bumpy behavior, but my hope was that we would see our next upwards bump to be able to break the previous one to go to, let's say, 140. Then you would have the start of more speculation, more volatility, and thus more trade potential. Doesn't show up here just yet. Cerberus also very flat above 130, so we gotta give a little bit of ground from 1 year low points, but buyers are just not in it. 120 for the buyers, 130 for the sellers. Very, very cheap Cerberus still on this 1 year chart, quite obvious. Then we get the curse. That was pretty nice. Full recovery to 200 million ISK for a curse. Response, of course, by supply coming in, pushes back down to below 150, and we are starting to move back up. Sellers are now at 162 already. So this gives me hope. If this has enough legs and we can play, get back into that 180, 200 range, then I think that there is signs that we are getting to see a little bit more speculation. Otherwise, there just might be too many Take-Two ships out there to make that happen, and we'll then need to spot the ones where supplies might run out first. Then we get the Damnation, and I think for the command ships, right, battle cruisers, larger ships, so a little bit harder to have huge reserves of those available. Basically, we are recovered at 300 million ISK. So yeah, 315 in fact for the sellers, 270 for the buyers. So I personally think that eventually all other ships are going to have to follow suit and to increase their value, but it may just take more time than what I was hoping. For the Deacon, for instance, just stuck at that lowest range for the year. It is of course just a logistics frigate, 15 for the sellers, 12 million for the buyers. But if you follow my thinking, then the Damnation, the reason why this one recovered to 300 million and is now stuck here is because it's the larger ship. It takes most advanced movements, and so it is the one where already suppliers and producers are feeling the new margins. And for the Deacon, there's just so many out there that we still have this inertia, and so this would be again a medium-term investment opportunity in my opinion. Then we get the Eagle, already back down. I think that is due because it's still a meta ship. 117 for the sellers, 110 for the buyers. I'd say it's another potential buy opportunity if you don't have Take-Two ships ready for sale, which I do. Then we get the EOS. You can see another command ship back at 300 million and easily able to stay there. 300 for the sellers, 280 for the buyers. So those good times are over. And then the Ares still just below 40 million, so slight recovery. You can see how the buyers, the minimum prices, have gone away from the 1 year low point. 40 million to 35 million. Yeah, it still feels a little bit low. I think it can go higher, but I thought we would see more of an upwards downwards motion at this point. Flycatcher, still very cheap, 43 million for the sellers, 38 million for the buyers. The Guardian, right, a little bit more movement, but just very, very shy. 125 for one seller, 130 for most, 115, that's not enough. That was nice. Here Heretic went up to 50 million, obviously a nice sell opportunity. We are coming back down below 40, so 40 to 50 swing. pretty nice. 39 for the sellers, 35 for the buyers. If you want to take a risk, this is another one where I would say you could buy a couple. Hound, and that's the bad news, right? This looked promising, spikes from 15 to 25, down to 15, up to 25, very, very nice. We're down to 15, so you can buy, but now the response, instead of continuing to build on that momentum, has been, well, we'll take it slow and steady. We're at 19.5 to 16 million, narrow margin, slightly upwards prices despite these, well, actually not a lot of supply. That is clearly drying up here, so we could be set for even higher prices and a slow sell opportunity. But if you're looking for that trade volatility, it just isn't there yet. Ikitursa, Triglavian kind of confirming that upwards price for Tech 2 in general, 570 almost for the sellers. And then we get the Ishtar, also slow and steady recovery since the expansion, and a new price range of 150 with a 151 to 140. Not much to say. Kirin, logistics frigates, still very, very cheap, very low. If I would have to still buy a couple of Tech 2 ships, I'd look into the logistics frigates, honestly. Then the Manticore, still pretty low as well, but no volatility, 17 to 16. I think you could have bought these lower as well, close to 15 million. So I'm not sure, right? It's possible that we can't reach 15 anymore, but it is possible that we still can somehow. So I would wait and see on that one. Nemesis also, right? The in-between spot where we don't want to be, 15 to 13 million. You basically want to buy as close to 10 million as possible. Nighthawk, command ship, right? 300 million. We are back. Then we get the Oneros. That's a little bit better, but the bad news is this is on one of the logistics cruisers with the lowest volumes possible. So here there's probably just less interest in the game. At least it's a sign that potential volatility can happen. So we just went up to 150, 153 for the sellers, but a big gap. Buyers not forced up here. They're still at 111 for the buyers, and so they know that like a dozen Oneros is going to bring that price back down. And yeah, it's the lowest volume, so to see such volatility is not likely in a lot of these other ships, unfortunately. Purifier also, right, nice volatility in October, November. Buy at 15, sell 25, buy 15, sell above 20. You get some trade to be had here, and then since then though, unfortunately, a bit more of a slow and steady upwards movement for the ship. 18.6 million for the sellers, well above 15 for the buyers. Yeah, not the best place to be. The Rook 150, very stable over the last month. The Saber also back down to the low point, so if you're looking to jump in, a couple of interdictors seem to be interesting. 36 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers on decent supplies. I think you can grab some Sabers very close to 35 million, 1 year low point, definitely worth looking into. And then the Scalpel, first logistics frigate. All right, well, look into the others, guys, because here, so not that long ago, you could have bought these for 16 million. Must be said, it has very, very low volumes on a daily basis, but we are up to 19.5 million. It's not a great trade, but at least it's a bit of a spike on the chart. Might just be an anomalous date. Well, actually, no, it's here as well. So not exactly sure what happened here, but that was definitely a sell opportunity on quite a bit of buying for Scalpels. Scimitar slowly landing on 100 million here again as well, 117 to 103. Then we get the Sleipnir, command ship, well above 300 million, I think pretty strong and popular as well, so a bit of a premium on that one. Vagabond, slightly higher, but nothing too speculative just yet. And then finally the Zarmast. Alright, a Triglavian ship, 1 year high point, selling now for 665 million. And not that long ago, you could have bought these below 400 million. So that's what we want to see more of. But unfortunately, the places where this is happening for now are ships with extremely low daily trade volumes. So I think we just need more patience, and yeah, I think I'm gonna look myself into buying some of these logistics frigates. I don't have any of those just yet, and they seem to be very low and primed for that upwards move, which I think will happen eventually. but it remains speculative, of course. Then we've got the Tech 3 ships coming in at 48.50. So let's see if anything is happening here. First of all, we've got the destroyers with the Confessor. Slight upwards pressure, but again, super stable. Pretty low volumes on this one as well. 47 million to 43 million. Buyers are clearly starting to drop out a little bit of this one as well. But yeah, sellers are just able to get the current price, super narrow margin, not moving anywhere. I think one of them moved. Yeah, here is the Heggate, but you can see that the 5-day moving average has crossed the 20-day. We are starting to come back down towards the 50 million range, 54 to 50 million. And here's the supply, right? 93 of them, gonna keep us in check again. So I think we'll just move right back to just above 50 million range easily. Then we've got the Jackdaw. Same story, except it's a bit above, a bit below 50 million. We're talking 52 now for the sellers, 45 for the buyers. All right, bit of margin, bit of running out of supply on this one, right? Running out of demand on the Confessor, running out of supply on the Jackdaw. There's a bit more room, but I still don't think it's trade worthy. And then finally we get the Zwepel. That is, well, stuck as 46 to 41 million, 10%. Not much to say still, in my opinion, on the destroyer market, except that, yes, contrary to what we've seen in, well, most of the last half year or so, we are starting to see some gaps showing up substantially, right? This is what we've been used to in both supply and the demand side of these ships. Unfortunately, the price response is next to nothing. A little bit better in the cruisers. So here is the Legion that again went above 200 million. 198 now for the sellers, 185 for the buyers. So obviously if you bought below 180, you just had 2 sell opportunities and you actually had a jumping point here as well. So that is a tradable wavy pattern on the Legion chart. The Loki had something similar and actually went up to 230. Could be event related on this one and is now coming back down substantially. 188 for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. It would be, well, actually that's below 180. That's nice. So I would say that right now you have the opportunity to jump in on a cheap Loki and you can see how the volatility potential above 200 million here, 1, 2, 3, 4 times since last half year, and even a 230 that is just over and done. There is a lot of movement though, so you can see that this price brought in way too many ships, crashes down, but for speculators that is of course exactly what we want to see. Then we get the Proteus making its way well above 200 as well, 215 to 203, so that one is in sell territory as well. And then the Tengu actually stabilized below the 200 million mark, so this one I need to see buyers well below 180 before we jump in. So that's a bit of margin that has started to open up. I think potentially it could happen. Get enough supply on the Tengu, put some pressure, put this one closer to a 190 for the sellers, and you'll see those buyers drop off, and then it can go quickly, right? Lose those 180 plus, and we're talking 175 to 170 coming into play, and that's where you can start to buy the Tengu again, and here sell 230, 200, 200. It is definitely possible. So if you're looking for actively trading right now with a little bit of risk, granted, because you never know what happens, but with that potential that within a month or so you can sell what you buy at the lowest price point, like for instance the Loki right now, it would be Tech 3 cruisers in my book. Loki looks really nice for selling, Legion for buying, excuse me. Legion and Proteus looks really nice for selling at the moment, and we need basically the Tengu to drop off a little bit more. Minimum price is starting to buckle here though, so it could happen. So that's it for the Tech 3 ships. We still have an extra product for the week, and we are going to look at faction battleships coming in at 53 minutes. Obviously CCP also coming in with a metric of like a 117% or even more increased production of faction ships. Well, if you introduce a lot of very powerful faction ships, that's kind of normal, but there is definitely a bit more happening here as well. And then with loyalty points that definitely have their influence on faction ship production, especially the Navy faction ships, it can be an interesting time, although I do think that speculating on winning and losing faction warfare is still not that great for faction ship trading. But let's start with the pirate faction battleships. Here, for instance, is the Barghest. November and in December, or just at the just before the year end, went up to 1.5 billion, excuse me, 1.5 billion ISK, so 1 year high points here over the last 2 months. But the response from the market is pretty fast, so we're down to 1.34 billion for the sellers, 1.2 billion for the buyers. Well, we're definitely well above average, or just touching the average now on this downturn, but at the moment Barghest very expensive. Macariel well above 750 million, also losing a bit of ground at the tail end, but basically expensive and well above average. The Nestor, slightly different story here, trending close to, well, above a billion ISK, 1.1 billion, 1.05 billion pretty much for the buyers, but trending slightly below average. And then we get the Nightmare just bumping from a below average price point to an above one, and we're recovering from that. We are at 1.1 billion as well, below a billion for the buyers. But these pirate faction battleships, very, very expensive, of course, a billion a pop. Balgorn, super expensive. Rattlesnake, actually, now that I think about it, to be expected. Lots of videos out there as well about how well the Rattlesnake does the sides for the Winter Nexus. Amazing PvE ship, and so here you do have a Winter Nexus spike that would have been actually doable for a trader that pays attention to this type of stuff, because just before all of this, you could have bought these below a billion ISK, and now you're selling them at 1.3 billion a pop, 1.2 billion for the buyers. So definitely you have that 20 to 30% profit over a month thanks to the Winter Nexus. Something again to think about for next year, as something similar might just happen. And then we get the Vindicator also trending up to 1.5 billion. I think in general these are very expensive except for the Nestor. And then the Nestor, that's actually, it is a very capable platform, but it is mostly a logistics platform. So yeah, Barghest, Macariel, Rattlesnake, all of these are great ships for the event and are trading at high prices. Navy faction stuff, let's take a look at this. Here is the Thunderchild, also going for a billion ISK, a little bit different than the other Navy faction battleships in that it's an Edencom ship, not a lot of supply, definitely more of a niche type of ship, and also in line with basically the pirate faction ships. But then if we go to the Apocalypse Navy issue, well, average prices, but of course a step down in price. 600 million for the sellers, 555 for the buyers. Narrow margin actually on this one, and right on the average for the year. Armageddon Navy issue, the other Amar one, same story. 600 million for the sellers, 550 for the buyers. Pretty much the average, but you can see that's pretty noticeable. Less noticeable here for the Apocalypse, but the Armageddon Navy issue, look at the volume changes ever since the expansion and a little bit before the expansion. If I'm not mistaken, that is because there are now sites where only Tech 1 or faction ships can come in, and so they now have their best use cases. They are best in slot for certain activities centered around faction warfare. Dominic's Navy issue, again, same story here with the volumes, and then at first prices went up, but with the new content, availability has gone up, and so we have recovered nicely. 600 for the sellers, 530 for the buyers. Megatron Navy issue, let's see if we're in line with the same story here. 590, actually a little bit less expensive, to 530. And then we get the Raven Navy issue. That one is also, well, volume-wise, not that noticeable. It was always very popular. Shields, missiles, some drones, very cool. 600 to 560, so even more narrow margin than the Amar ones, but it's very same or similar price tags. 570 to 530 for the Scorpion Navy issue. Tempest Fleet issue, then Minmatar, a little bit less popular, but 590 to 540, same as the Galente range. And then the Typhoon Fleet issue, which is actually I think my brother's favorite battleship, or no, the Typhoon itself, not necessarily fleet issue, both of these 570 to 538. So we clearly do have a little bit of difference, but at the same time everything is coming together in that 550 to 600 million price tag for the sellers. That is what a Navy faction battleship is going for, and yeah, availability will have increased a lot for some of these, as they've become very, very nice ships to fly in certain parts of faction warfare. So pretty interesting stuff. I personally, there is maybe a bit of potential. You can clearly see that for some reason Galente and Minmatar is a little bit lower in price range, 530 for the buyers. So you could maybe speculate on those, trying to consider them cheap at the moment. But the potential I don't think is very high, because even an Apocalypse Navy issue that's selling for 607 is only, buyers are coming in at 555. So I think availability has become strong enough with these higher volumes that you don't have as easy a time for seasonal changes depending on what happens in faction warfare. It really does feel like it's a bit more of a uniform market across the Navy faction battleships. We'll keep an eye on it and see if that's how it continues to be, and maybe if the allegiance system will eventually have a potential impact on that. But for now, speculating in Navy faction battleships is, I don't think, too good of a move. But there we go, guys. That is it for this EVE talk. I'm definitely looking forward to everything else that CCP has planned for the game at this point. 20 years of EVE Online coming, so in my opinion, lots of cool stuff on the horizon. And as always, I'll keep you guys up to date. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.